First, Tehran accused the International Atomic Energy Agency of being complicit in Israel's attacks on its nuclear sites. Now, the UN agency's pulled all its inspectors out of Iran. So, who will monitor its nuclear activities? And could this trigger another round of tension? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. UN inspectors have left Iran after Tehran cut ties with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This means that inspectors will no longer be able to monitor the country's nuclear activities. That's led to many people questioning the future of Iran's nuclear programme and fearing another round of tension. Israel is thought to be the only nation in the Middle East that possesses nuclear weapons. It launched its attacks on Iran last month, claiming that Tehran was weeks away from producing a nuclear weapon. The United States backed its ally, striking key Iranian nuclear facilities. The 12-day war killed hundreds of people and several scientists in Iran. But Tehran has struck a defiant note, suspending cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog and also threatening to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So, what does all this mean, and what might the future hold? Lots to discuss with our guests, but first, Kulsum Sharif sets it all up for us.
The UN nuclear watchdog says it's pulled out its last remaining inspectors from Iran, deepening a standoff between Tehran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's come after Iran's parliament passed a law suspending cooperation with the agency. The move prevents inspectors from overseeing the country's nuclear program, leading to concerns Iran could resume its enrichment of uranium.
We will enrich as much as we need without accepting any conditions. We may need to have 90% enrichment. Zero enrichment is Trump's illusion.
Relations between Iran and the IAEA hit a low after the US and Israel bombed key Iranian nuclear sites in a 12-day conflict last month. Iran accused the UN agency of enabling the attacks after passing a resolution that Tehran was not complying with its obligations on nuclear non-proliferation. US President Donald Trump called the strikes a great success. As the ceasefire holds, Trump says he will discuss Iran with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he visits the White House on July the 7th.
The whole nuclear thing, I would say it's set back permanently. If they were going to do it again, they might as well start in a different location because that location is totally demolished. They could start, but I would think they'd have to start in a different location. But if they did start, there'd be a problem. We wouldn't allow that to happen.
For years, Iran has denied Israeli claims it was close to building a nuclear bomb, insisting its nuclear activities are for peaceful and civilian purposes. Tehran agreed to inspections and to limit its activities as part of a landmark 2015 nuclear deal in exchange for sanctions relief. Trump withdrew the United States from that accord in 2018 during his first term as president. Now, in his second term, his administration has held talks with Iran's leaders to renegotiate the nuclear deal. But it was after claims by the Israeli Prime Minister that Iran was just weeks away from weaponizing its uranium stockpile that Israeli and US forces attacked Iranian nuclear facilities. Those attacks have shattered diplomatic momentum towards reaching an agreement, and with Iran threatening to exit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests from Tehran. We're joined by Abbas Aslani, a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. From Vienna, we're joined by Tariq Rauf, former head of verification and security policy at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by Harlan Ullman, a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council and chairman of the Killowen Group. That's a strategic advisory company. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Harlan, let's start with you. Is the world a safer place after the US and Israeli attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities and IAEA inspectors withdrew, or a more dangerous one?
I think the simple answer is it's probably far more dangerous. The withdrawal of the inspectors, I think, was predictable for three reasons. One, Iran wants to create uncertainty on the part of the United States and Israel about how much damage was really done and what their next steps are going to be. As you know, on the one hand, weapons of mass destruction are against the Islamic religion. But I think that the first reason, as I said, was uncertainty. Second, this will give Iran more freedom to be able to do its damage inspection. And three, I think it's a further signal to the world that Iran is still in the game and has not given up yet. However, these are still early days. It may have been a 12-day war, but it's going to play out over a long, long time, in my judgment.
Abbas, could the recent attack on Iran's nuclear facilities bring about the very thing that it was supposed to prevent? Could Iran now be convinced that building a nuclear weapon, which has always said that it doesn't want to do, and quickly, is the only way to guarantee its future security?
Adrian, Iran has been reviewing its cooperation with the IAEA, but not necessarily meaning that this will end up in the country moving toward a nuclear bomb or withdrawing from the non-proliferation treaty. And, for Iran, there could be some implications. The core implication is closing of a significant intelligence vulnerability, and the recent military aggression by Israel and the United States targeted the very facilities that were under intense, monitoring as well as permanent monitoring during the past years and decades. So this has created the perception here in Tehran that the data that Iran provided to the IAEA were exploited by the hostile intelligence services in order to precisely target those nuclear facilities. In addition to that, Iran cannot guarantee the safety of the IAEA inspectors at the sites that were bombed, and the onus or the blame is to be toward those who conducted that aggression. This is the perception here in Tehran. And the way Iran says that this was not an action initiated by Iran, but as a direct and unavoidable consequence of the recent military aggression that was carried out by the United States as well as Israel. For sure, this could have implications for the international community. Okay. They might be losing their real-time visibility, but this is up to the aggression, not Iran's actions. This is the perception here these days in Tehran.
Tariq, what happens when a nation bars IAEA inspectors? Who's now going to oversee Iran's compliance with the non-proliferation treaty, which Iran has said that it is still committed to? Does anyone know where Iran's store of enriched uranium is and in what state it's in?
Well, Adrian, let me make 3 points. First of all, it was completely illegal to attack militarily safeguarded nuclear facilities, and especially when IAEA inspectors were in country. In March 2003, when Iraq was bombed by the US and its allies, the IAEA was given advance notice to make sure that the inspectors were in a safe place. Let me give you some numbers. From 1 January 2024 to the 28th of May 2025, IAEA carried out more than 700 inspections at these 3 nuclear facilities. More than 1,400 person days of inspections were expended here. IAEA did more than 160 design information verifications, which is verifying the insides of these 3 enrichment facilities. Now, once the country asked inspectors to leave, we really don't have a picture as to that country's nuclear activities, so there will be this big gap. However, the Director General, Rafael Mariano Grossi, has indicated that we need to give Iran some time. It is recovering from a traumatic experience of having its nuclear facilities bombed. And more importantly, nuclear scientists killed in their beds along with their families. And no international association of physicists or nuclear scientists have condemned this attack on a nuclear scientist. Also, I don't see international media organizations condemning the bombing of the Iranian state television studio right in the middle of a broadcast. So to conclude, for this part, it is regrettable that Iran has asked the inspectors to leave, but for the time being, I think it's for their own security and safety that the IAEA comes back to Vienna. And once there is some agreement, the IAEA can go back and try to restore continuity of knowledge.
Okay.
As for the nuclear material, IAEA verified it until the 28th of May. After that, we don't know.
All right. Harlan, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying for years that Iran was only weeks away from building a nuclear weapon. How close was Iran, if that indeed was its clandestine intention to build a bomb?
The fact of the matter is we really don't know. Only Iran will know. I think that's pure speculation. My guess is that Iran was a lot further away from building a weapon, but until there's bomb damage assessment, we really will not know. Iran has the answers to that. But look, the problem is that in the West, Iran's threats to destroy Israel, kill Americans, et cetera, has created the image of a rogue regime. The United States claims that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. And so the ideology in the West is that Iran is a dangerous threat, part of the so-called axis of evil with China and Russia. And since it was Israel's opportunity to strike, obviously with American acquiescence, Netanyahu took and seized the moment. So this is very, very opportunistic. But the fact of the matter is, I think if we went back to 2015 and still had the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in place, we would not be in this situation. I believe it was working, and I believe abrogating that treaty on the part of the Trump administration was one of the great strategic mistakes of this century so far.
Abbas, was Iran a dangerous threat? Do you agree with Harlan's assessment there?
Adrian, Iran's nuclear activities have been going under most intensive monitoring mechanisms by the IAEA. If you look at the numbers which have been provided, you can see that the significant amount of those monitoring by IAEA has been related to Iran's nuclear facilities. And interestingly, those nuclear sites have been bombed by those nuclear weapons holders against those peaceful nuclear facilities. So I think the idea here is not about non-proliferation or the threats that Iran was posing, but it was mostly related to subjugation of Iran and, let's say, weakening the country through different tools. If it was not the nuclear, I think, issue, there could have been other pretexts. So we have been seeing what has been happening in the past decades. We have been seeing that what actor has been creating instability or posing threats to others in the region. Israel holds the nuclear warheads. It has been, attacking several countries in the past couple of years in the region. But from Iranian side, you're not seeing that kind of, let's say, threats or actions being posed and inflicted on others. But what happened recently was also an aggression against the country, which Iran responded and reacted based on that self-defense. So I think this is somehow distorting the truth. Iran is not posing the threat, but is facing a significant threat, which can make an impact on its calculations moving forward.
Tariq, Iran has accused the IAEA of facilitating the bombing of its nuclear facilities by issuing that critical report on the 31st of May, which led to a resolution by the agency's Board of Governors declaring Iran in breach of its obligations to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, something that it had never been found to have been before. Did the IAEA facilitate those attacks? Is Iran right to be suspicious, to be angry of the IAEA?
I think that is completely unjustified. It is clear that the decision to attack Iranian nuclear facilities had already been taken well in advance. The report of the 31st of May by the Director General referred to activities that had taken place in the early 2000s and some sanitization activities from 2009 to 2018. The IAEA did not make the finding that Iran currently had a structured nuclear weapon development program. Now, in 2006, the IAEA Board of Governors found Iran's previous activities to 2003 to be in breach of safeguards. And again, this resolution that was adopted on the 21st of November last year should have made a similar finding that the activities of the early 2000s and from 2009 to 18 on sanitization, those were in breach. Because the IAEA Safeguards Implementation Report for 2024, issued in June, again concluded that all declared nuclear material had been accounted for. And since Iran was not implementing its additional protocol, IAEA was not in a position to give the assurance of the absence of undeclared nuclear activities and nuclear material. So unfortunately, the Board of Governors has been politicized. And this politicization started over the Iraq nuclear file, and then it continued over North Korea, Syria, and Libya. And now, in my view, the IAEA Board of Governors meets more as a political body rather than a technical body. And in that sense, both the bombing and the actions of the Board of Governors, that is the member states, are damaging the efficacy of the international safeguard system, which the 191 members, parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, have repeatedly said that the IAEA is the sole competent technical authority to verify the non-proliferation obligations of states pursuant to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Harlan, President Trump reiterated again on Friday that he wouldn't allow Iran to resume its nuclear ambitions. He claimed that the Iranian leadership was keen to meet him. He also confirmed Iran will be central as a topic when Netanyahu visits the White House on Monday. Why is it up to him, President Trump, to decide whether Iran has a nuclear program? As we said, Iran has never until recently been found to be not fulfilling its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has never broken those obligations before. Why are nations like Pakistan, India, North Korea allowed to have nuclear weapons, and Iran isn't even allowed to have a nuclear program for what it says is for peaceful purposes only?
Historians will look back at this as a classic reinforcement of two mutual reinforcing strategies. I think the Israelis and Netanyahu have been very, very clever in terms of how they dealt with Hamas, however brutally, then Hezbollah, staging the reasons and rationale for an attack against Israel, against Iran, to put at least a stoppage to the nuclear program. President Trump has been, I think, the most effective president in utilizing the powers of the office since Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. Make no mistake whether that's good or bad. And I think in Trump's mind, he believes that he has the authority to take charge globally as the global leader. He intervened in the India-Pakistan dust-up. He's tried to put in place negotiations over Gaza and Ukraine. And I think given the Abraham Accords that were agreed to during his first term, I think he has delusions of a solution in which this bombing now will force Iran to come to the table. He can coerce Netanyahu to reach some kind of an agreement, and we will have peace in the Middle East. I think this is grandiose. I don't think it's going to work. But you take the egos of Netanyahu and Donald Trump, and that's where we are right now. And I think that's what both leaders are approaching, that this may be an opportunity, but I really doubt it's the opportunity people think it will be.
Abbas, without feet on the ground, how on earth can President Trump be so sure that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, as he said, permanently set back?
Adrian, there is a significant question mark for that statement if Iran's nuclear program has been completely obliterated. So why to negotiate and to go to the negotiating table? There's no, let's say, issue left to be raised at the table. That's a significant question to be asked. But in the second point is that Donald Trump thought that through using different, tools in its foreign policy toolbox, like the increasing sanctions, military threat and aggression, as well as, covert actions, he could get more compromises from Iran. What they expected from Iranian side was a zero enrichment. Then they added and built up on that, and saying that they wanted an unconditional surrender. But this is not the case from the Iranian perspective. Iran has been showing resilience, and they have been resisting against those demands and pressure. So this has backfired. Iran's nuclear program has been subject to further, let's say, sabotage or let's say security measures in the past. Also assassinating nuclear scientists. This time it was a bit more, assassinating and killing senior commanders as well as civilians in the country. this seems, this raises the question whether this is only, limited to Iran's nuclear program or something they want bigger and beyond that, which is maybe a regime change. Because what they thought initially was that maybe by a military aggression, they could create a chaos in the country. They could bring the people to the streets, provoking them to protest against the government in order to create a chaos and a regime change. But this, worked the other way around. This created a unity and cohesion.
Is the Non-Proliferation Treaty being seen by more nations now as discriminatory, selectively enforced? Has the treaty's legitimacy begun to unravel following the US attacks on Iran, given that a nation like the US, a founding signatory, can target another signatory's nuclear infrastructure with apparently no consequences?
Yes, unfortunately, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is now coming under greater and greater stress. One, because of the lack of nuclear disarmament by the nuclear armed states, United States, Russia, France, China, and the United Kingdom, despite their obligations to disarm, and they're actually building up. And then this is not the first instance. Iran was bombed before, Syria was bombed, Iraq was bombed, and now Iran is bombed yet again. So this shows that those countries that have the power will act in flagrant violation of various international rules in order to enforce their own policies. And there is always blowback. We can see the situations in Libya, Iraq, Syria, following these military attacks in Afghanistan as well. So by destabilizing a large country like Iran, which sits atop the lifeline of the world for oil and gas, we don't know what the damaging situation will be. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the agency safeguard system, every time we have these types of actions, suffers a major blow. On the other hand, the majority of non-nuclear weapon states have joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty to ensure that their neighbors' nuclear programs are exclusively peaceful and not to develop nuclear weapons. So there is this interesting juxtaposition of frustration on the one side and yet also support for the treaty on the other side. So we will have the next 5-yearly conference scheduled for 2026 in New York. And thus far, all the signs are that we will have a third successive meeting of NPT states parties, which will not be able to reach any agreement on enhancing the authority, integrity, and implementation of this treaty, which is the sole multilateral nuclear arms control treaty to which 191 countries are parties to.
Tariq, just very briefly, if more nations feel their security depends on possessing a nuclear deterrent, nations perhaps that have begun to doubt US security guarantees, and they begin to build one, who could stop them?
No one. And it's unfortunate that last year the president of Poland voiced an interest in nuclear weapons, as did the president of South Korea. And the current president of the United States in his first term indicated that those of the allies who might wish to develop their own nuclear deterrent would be welcome to do so, because that would lessen the burden on the US. So these are very damaging situations and indications. And unfortunately, this situation may encourage more underground and clandestine nuclear weapon development programs, which might be very hard to detect by the IAEA or by the national technical means of the so-called great powers.
I will come back to you in a moment, Harlan, for the last word before we end the programme. But first, Abbas, give us a sense of what you think might be going on behind the scenes. I mean, you've got US President Trump making his pronouncement, speaking again on Friday as he did. What might be going on behind the scenes diplomatically? Do you think that the US and Iran are still talking to each other right now?
Adrian, there is no negotiation at the moment going on, and the opposition here in Tehran is against those negotiations have been increasingly more than ever, because the walls of mistrust and distrust between the two sides stands taller than ever. And, I think the United States as well as Israel, they are going to continue their pattern of escalation. The point from their side is not, I think, the non-proliferation issue. it's mostly Iran yielding and capitulating to their demands. So this is not something acceptable here in Tehran. So I think what we could be expecting in the, days or weeks to come will be increased military threat, renewed military threat, as well as increasing sanctions against the country and covert actions against the country in terms of nuclear activities or elsewhere. So, in parallel, the issues that or the statements that are being made regarding to the negotiations here in Tehran are being viewed as, let's say, a cover for those pressure, as those threats, military threats, as well as a disguise to conduct in parallel their pressure, strategy. So for the time being, I think what we can be expecting in the days or weeks to come will be increased tensions. And we have to see how things will proceed later on.
Okay, Harlan, I'm going to ask a question that I put to a guest a few weeks ago when we last discussed this issue before the withdrawal of UN inspectors. Yep. Could it be argued that if there's any country in the world that shouldn't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, that it is Israel, which has defied all international conventions, rejected calls for it to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and has barred the IAEA from conducting any inspections of its nuclear sites? Whereas Iran, up until recently, had mostly complied with all of that. How can that be allowed?
It's a little bit too late to raise that point, and you make a very, very good one. Politics is unfair. Let me just make 2 points that are really pertinent here. I think Israel was out for regime change, and ironically, instead of weakening the regime in Tehran, it's probably been strengthened, since the Persian people, the Iranians, are not very happy with being attacked. Second, the issue of non-proliferation is really a good one. The problem here is that not only is Donald Trump unpredictable, he probably doesn't know what he's going to do until he finally does it. 2 weeks ago, everybody was afraid he might leave NATO and that nations would have to build nuclear weapons, Poland in particular, but possibly South Korea and Japan. Now that we've got NATO to commit to 5% GDP defense spending, which they probably will not make, and given reassurances to South Korea and Japan that the likelihood of non-proliferation may be reduced. But we will see, and as I said, I don't think you can predict what Trump is going to do because he doesn't make up his mind until the last minute, and that makes making policy very, very difficult.
There, gentlemen, we will have to end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us today. Abbas Aslani, Tariq Rauf and Harlan Ullman. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.